Isang magandang araw mga Carpatids! Welcome to our first ever YouTube live tutorial dito lamang sa the Customs Administration Resource Project YouTube channel. As always, kasama niyo na naman ako, ang laging ready at your service ang inyong Sarge, minsan Alden, pero simula ngayon ang inyong Carpatid, Sir RJ. We're very thankful na makasama kayo ngayon and I'm sure excited na kayong lahat para sa lecture natin today. Pero bago muna yan, we invite everyone to like this live stream, share nyo kay classmate, share nyo kay crush, share nyo kay friend, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please also like and follow our official Facebook page, that's the CA Resource Project, para naman laging updated kayo mga Carpatids. So without further ado, let's get ready to rumble na. Here to give us his lecture on laws and rules on the government's right to compulsory acquisition, our one and only Attorney Chris Kapul. Take it away, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, Sir RJ. Good afternoon, Carpatids. So, magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. I hope okay kayo lahat sa mga pinalalagay ninyo. So, again, welcome sa session natin ngayong hapon. Hopefully, this will be a very short session kasi as we all know, yung board exam natin is scheduled and it's fast approaching and before we know it, mag-November na. So, I think it's best na kung mag-start tayong mag-review, simulan na natin ngayon. Okay? There's no better time to start than today, than now. Okay? So, hopefully, this will be the first of many. We'll try our best. We'll try to fit in our schedule para mas makarami tayo ng mga sessions like this one. para din makatulong sa mga bata nating mga magiging customs broker sa magiging future ng ating industry. So, kumbaga parang we want to reach out to you and we want to help you as much as possible. That's why we embarked on this project, no? So, hopefully this will be the first of the many sessions that we will be having in the future. Actually, we already had a session sometime last August, but na-miss namin kayo. So, eto, magsimula ulit tayo. Okay? So, thank you, Sir RJ, for opening our session today. So, siguro let's start para makarami tayo and makatapos tayo ng session natin today na maaga. Of course, although it's weekend din naman, para din we have time to enjoy maya-maya, no? Okay. So, as mentioned by Sir RJ kanina, yung topic natin for this afternoon is about the government's right to compulsory acquisition. Okay? The government's right to compulsory acquisition, there is a specific provision providing for such right to compulsory acquisition sa ating CMTA. Okay? So para mas maintindihan natin yung ibig sabihin ng compulsory acquisition, siguro tignan natin kung ano ba yung ibig sabihin muna ng mga salitang compulsory. Also, yung salitang acquisition. So ano ba ibig sabihin? Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng salitang compulsory? Or what do we mean when we mention the word or when we say the word compulsory? So, ganyan lang naman yan eh. It's a simple tip for each and every one of you kapag meron kayong mga salita, pag meron kayong word or terminology na gustong malaman kung anong ibig sabihin. The internet is just there. Knowledge is just a click away. So, type in nyo lang yung word na yun and then malalaman nyo kung ano yung ibig sabihin. So, that's exactly what I did for this one. Compulsory. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng salitang compulsory? So, when I Google the word compulsory, ito yung lumabas na meaning niya. And I find that this definition, I find that this meaning fits our description for today. Okay? So, as you can see, naka-flash naman dito sa inyong mga screen yung definition ng compulsory. Number 1, definition niya is mandatory or enforced. Coercive. Number 2, coercive and compelling. So, sabihin, mandatory, siguro sa lengguwahe natin o sa Filipino, siguro mas angkop yung sapilitan, okay? Yun, sapilitan, compulsory, hindi ka pwedeng tumanggi, you cannot refuse, you cannot say no, okay? So that's essentially what compulsory means, okay? So let's proceed to the next slide, okay? Ano naman ang ibig sabihin ng salitang acquisition? Okay. Acquisition, as the definition says here, is the act of acquiring something. The act of acquiring something. And when we look at the meaning of the word acquire, ano ba yung ibig sabihin nung salita na acquire? Ibig sabihin naman nun, to get as one's own. To get as one's own. Ibig sabihin, kukuha ka ng bagay, kukuha ka ng something, you get something, and you take it as your own. Okay? So, coming together, compulsory acquisition, a coercive, a compulsory, a mandatory, an enforced taking of property as someone's own. So, the essence of compulsory acquisition is the government compulsorily takes something or takes property as its own, okay? But that's not the exact definition of compulsory acquisition. The law has, or rather the rules give us the exact definition of compulsory acquisition. Specifically, the Bureau of Customs issued a particular regulation for that. Let's take a look, please, at the definition of compulsory acquisition. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, ayan. I got this definition from Customs Administrative Order or CAO 16-2019. So when we say compulsory acquisition, that is the definition of compulsory acquisition. It shall refer to the power of the government to acquire imported goods when the importer's declared customs value is unconscionably low with reference to Section 4.2 hereof. Okay? So looking at the definition of compulsory acquisition, it says here that it's a power that the government can choose to exercise. So if you're going to ask me, sir, does that mean that the government can take away the importation? Does that mean that the government can take away our property and we cannot do anything about it? Well, to a sense, yes, but again, let me give you this caveat. No? There is always this provision from our 1987 Constitution. Um, to be more specific, that's in Article 3, Section 1 of the Bill of Rights from our 1987 Constitution. It says there, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, that's the first part of the provision from our Constitution. So, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, so meaning to say that a person, in the strictest sense of the word, can be deprived of his property provided that due process will be observed. Okay? So magtataka kayo, compulsory acquisition, pwede bang kunin ng government yung property namin? To answer your question, well, yes, that's the essence of compulsory acquisition. The government can take and will take your property, but the requirement under the 1987 Constitution is that the taking of your property should be or should observe due process of law. Okay? So ano ngayon yung due process of law na tinatawag? Ano yung due process of law na sinasabi? That's what we're going to discuss this afternoon. Okay? Ano ba yung tamang proseso ng pag-compulsorily acquire ng gobyerno ng importation mo? Okay? Or ng importation ng client mo? Okay? Now, sige, let's proceed to the next slide, please. Balikan natin, okay, so let's go back a few years ago when we were under the regime of the Tariff and Customs Code of the Philippines. No? Just a brief history. Before, the provision on compulsory acquisition is Section 2317 of our Tariff and Customs Code. Okay? Sino ba or through whom does the government exercise its right of compulsory acquisition? Sino ba yung nag-exercise nitong right na ito on behalf of the government? So as you can see, it's flashed there in your screen. Under the Tariff and Customs Code of the Philippines, it's the Commissioner of Customs who exercises this right of compulsory acquisition. Okay? So to answer the question, sino ba yung nag-exercise itong right of compulsory acquisition? There you go. Under the TCCP, it's the commissioner. Now, let's look at the CMTA provision. Okay, under the law, or under the present regime, the provision in your Customs Modernization Tariff Act, the CMTA, next slide please, nandyan yan sa next slide natin. The provision for compulsory acquisition is in the next slide. Ayan, nandito naman yan sa section 709 of your CMTA. That's the primary, or if I'm not mistaken, it's the only provision of your CMTA which pertains to compulsory acquisition. So let's take a look. Section 709. Sino ba? Sino ba sa gobyerno, or through whom does the government exercise its right to compulsorily acquire your goods? Similar to the Tariff and Customs Code provision, ayan, makikita nyo naman sa provision natin, I already placed an arrow there, it's also through the commissioner. It's also the commissioner who exercises this right of compulsory acquisition on behalf of the government. Okay? So, but the only difference is, if you take a look at the Tariff and Customs Code provision and this present CMTA provision, you will notice a little difference. Under the CMTA provision, meron siyang dinagdag, okay? In order to protect government revenues against undervaluation of goods, the commissioner may, okay, ito yung dinagdag, motu proprio, or upon recommendation of the district collector, acquire imported goods, okay? So dinagdag niya yung phrase na motu proprio, or upon recommendation of the district collector. So under the CMTA, now, the district collector is given
the authority or the power to recommend compulsory acquisition of your goods. To whom will he recommend? Well, to the commissioner. Again, but that's one major revision here in the CMTA. The district collector was also given the power to make recommendation as regards the government's power or right to compulsory acquisition. Okay? So again, if you're going to be asked in your board exam, sino ba or who exercises the government's right to compulsory acquisition? It's the commissioner. But the thing is, the district collector also has recommendatory powers. Okay? Collector can exercise his right to recommend compulsory acquisition. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, if you're going to look at the implementing rules, as I mentioned earlier, we have CAO 16-2019 to implement the CMTA provision. Okay, and the CAO rather also tells us it repeats what was already said in the CMTA provision. Sino ba yung nag-exercise ng right to compulsory acquisition? Again, as you can see in CAO 16-2019, it's the commissioner. Again, with special reservation of the power of the collector, district collector, to make recommendation of compulsory acquisition. Okay? Okay, let's proceed. Now that we've answered the question who, why, let's answer the question why. Why does the government, or why will the government choose to exercise its right to compulsory acquisition? Anong makukuha ng gobyerno? Anong mapapala ng gobyerno if it will take possession or take ownership of your goods? Anong makukuha ng gobyerno? Anong mapapala ng gobyerno if it exercises this right to compulsory acquisition? The answer is there. Also, in the CMTA Section 709, the answer is the purpose of compulsory acquisition is this: to protect government revenue against undervaluation of goods. Again, we will go back to the basic function of the Bureau of Customs, which is revenue collection. And in this sense, this is, sabihin na natin na this right to compulsory acquisition is one way by which the Bureau of Customs exercises its right to collect and to protect the revenue that it has collected. Okay? So primary purpose of this right to compulsory acquisition is revenue protection. Okay? The government wants to protect its revenues from undervaluation of goods. Okay, next slide please. Yeah. We also look at the CAO. Nandun din yan. Nandun din yung purpose ng compulsory acquisition. Your CAO will also show you sa Section 2 ng CAO. Again, andyan na naman yan. To protect government revenue. In instances where there is substantial basis to make a finding that the imported goods are undervalued. Now, if you will also look at the CAO provision, there is also a second purpose there, a second reason why the government exercises its right to compulsory acquisition there, to deter importers from under-declaring the value of their imported goods. Okay, so those are the two primary purpose of the government's right to compulsory acquisition. Sige, let's continue. Now, how does the government exercise its right to compulsory acquisition? Okay, there's one point of emphasis which I would like to make with you this afternoon. If you will look at Section 709 of your CMTA, basahin ko lang yung first few lines. In order to protect the government's revenues against undervaluation of goods, the commissioner may. So I wish to emphasize on that word may. When you use the word may, it denotes something which is discretionary upon the commissioner. Okay? Ibig sabihin, when you use the word may, pwedeng mangyari, pwedeng hindi. Pwedeng gawin ni commissioner, pwedeng hindi gawin ni commissioner. The Commissioner may choose to exercise its right to compulsory acquisition. The Commissioner may also choose not to exercise the government's right to compulsory acquisition. That's the importance, or that's the significance of the word may under our law. The Commissioner is given discretion on whether or not to exercise the government's right to compulsory acquisition. So let's proceed. Yan. Okay, ano ang nangyayari? How does the government exercise its right to compulsory acquisition? Step 1. The government issues an NCA, Notice of Compulsory Acquisition. NCA, again, that's the Notice of Compulsory Acquisition. Ano yung Notice of Compulsory Acquisition? Ano yung NCA? The definition can be found in your CAO. It's there. I also place it there. The NCA shall refer to the preliminary order issued by the Commissioner identifying the goods subject for compulsory acquisition. The important word there is preliminary. Ibig sabihin, it's not yet definite, it's not yet final, it's not yet conclusive, it's preliminary. Okay? Kumbaga sa Filipino, pauna pa lang. Kumbaga, it's hindi pa siya final, hindi pa siya executory. It's just a preliminary determination by the Commissioner. Okay? So what happens? Again, we mentioned earlier, the first step is that the government, the Commissioner, will issue the NCA, or the Notice of Compulsory Acquisition. If you look at your CAO, the Commissioner may, motu proprio, issue the NCA upon determination that the goods are valued unconscionably low. Ibig sabihin, yung dineklarang value ng importer, yung dineklarang value ng goods, sa tingin ng Commissioner, sa tingin ni Commissioner, parang masyado yatang mababa. So I think in that case, the Commissioner has the discretion, the Commissioner has the power to issue an NCA, or a Notice of Compulsory Acquisition. Okay. Now, what happens after the NCA is issued? Let's look at 5.2. Ayan, nandiyan din siya. Let's look at 5.2. That's in your CAO. If the issuance of the NCA is upon recommendation of the district collector, the Commissioner shall act on the recommendation within 48 hours, and in case of perishable goods, within 24 hours. Recommendation of the district collector shall be deemed denied when no NCA is issued by the Commissioner within the period. So again, let's recall earlier na may dalawang means, or there are two ways to initiate compulsory acquisition. One is the Commissioner motu proprio issues the NCA, and two, the collector recommends and the Commissioner acts favorably on the recommendation. Okay? So there, bottom line, the first step towards compulsory acquisition is the issuance of the NCA by the government. Okay? Let's proceed. Next slide, please. Yan. So what happens after the NCA has been issued by the Commissioner? Number 2, this is the second step, transfer. So this is section 5.3 of your CAO. Upon issuance of the NCA, the goods shall immediately be transferred to a secured area or facility under the jurisdiction of the Bureau. Okay? So after the NCA is issued, number 2, the goods are transferred to a facility under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Customs. Okay, let's continue. Next slide, please. Yan. So the NCA has been issued. The goods have been transferred. What will happen next? So ito yung next step. Number 3, step 3, there will be a compulsory acquisition proceedings. Okay? If you look at section 5.4 of your CAO, the Bureau shall conduct compulsory acquisition proceedings within, andyan din yung time period, 3 working days after the issuance of the NCA, and render a decision within 5 working days from the termination of the proceedings, of the compulsory acquisition proceedings. Okay? NCA is issued, the goods have been transferred, compulsory acquisition proceedings are conducted, after which, number 4, the commissioner comes up with the decision regarding the proceedings. And in that decision, if the decision is that the goods are indeed undervalued, then the commissioner issues the WCA, or the warrant of compulsory acquisition. Okay? WCA. Take note that this WCA is different from the NCA, which we mentioned earlier. What's the WCA? In the definition of WCA, it's also there in your CAO. The WCA, or warrant of compulsory acquisition, it shall refer to the decision of the commissioner to acquire the goods subject for compulsory acquisition. So again, the difference between WCA and NCA is that yung NCA it's just a preliminary determination by the commissioner. Kumbaga paunang determination lang yung NCA. But this time, when a WCA is issued, it's a decision already on the part of the commissioner that the goods indeed will be acquired by the government. Okay? So again, the WCA is the decision itself. The NCA, it's just a preliminary determination by the commissioner. Okay? Take note also that as provided for under section 5.5 of your CAO, nakalagay dyan sa last sentence ninyo, a notice of the decision, meaning a copy of the warrant, a copy of the WCA, shall be provided to the importer. So this time, a copy of the warrant or a copy of the decision of the commissioner, it will be given or it will be provided to the importer. So this time, the importer will know that the government has already decided to compulsorily acquire the goods in question. Okay? Sige, let's proceed to the next slide. Yan. Again, since we're discussing about compulsory acquisition, how this power is being exercised, and since we also mentioned earlier that the purpose of compulsory acquisition is to prevent undervaluation, ano ba yung tinatawag or ano ba yung tinatawag na badges of undervaluation? When we say badges, this is not necessarily evidence, but these are merely indicators of undervaluation. These are merely indicators that probably the goods have been declared, or that the value for the goods that have been declared is lower than what should actually have been, what should have been declared actually. Okay, so badges or indicators of undervaluation. Number 1, duty benchmarking. Number 2, information from customs of other countries or report based on a valid industry complaint or recommendation of organizations that the value declared is unconscionably low. Okay? And number 3, applying the methods of valuation. I mean, methods of valuation, that's a separate topic altogether, but applying those 6 methods of valuation, there's still a discrepancy of 30% in the value declared as against the other reference values. So, nabanggit sa 4.2.1, section 4.2.1 of the CAO, duty benchmarking, and that's also that term, no? Take note of this term, baka lang sakali matanong in your quiz, in your exam, or whether maybe also in the board exam. Take note of this term also. Duty benchmarking or duty benchmark, there's a definition under section under your CAO, section 3.4, duty benchmark. It shall refer to the practice of paying uniform duty on certain categories of goods. That's in the next slide, please. Yeah, duty benchmark shall refer to the practice of paying uniform duty on certain categories of goods, disregarding the quality, quantity, and the actual value of goods. Okay, so that's the definition of duty benchmark. Ibig sabihin, kahit gaano man karami yung goods na na in-import mo, same value pa rin yung dinedeclare mo. Mas higher quality man yung goods na pinadala mo, same value pa rin kesa sa lower quality goods yung dineclare mo. So there could probably be, this can serve as a badge. Again, to put emphasis on this is not necessarily evidence of undervaluation, but these are indicators of or badges na tinatawag of undervaluation. So again, the first indicator is a duty benchmark. Okay. Now, going back to our earlier discussion regarding the purpose of compulsory acquisition to protect the government's revenue from undervaluation, paano napoprotektahan yung revenue ng government through compulsory acquisition? Okay? It goes this way kasi the government, as we all know, no, when an importation comes into the country, there's a customs broker or there's a declarant which fills up the goods declaration, and doon sa goods declaration mayroong portion doon wherein the value of the goods will be declared. So chances are, if undervaluation has been committed, the value of the goods that will be indicated in the goods declaration is lower than the actual amount of the goods or than the actual value of the goods. So in other words, yung importer or whoever is responsible for it tries to reduce or tries to lower the duty that will be paid by declaring a lower amount of the value of the goods. So in other words, saan pumapasok ngayon yung compulsory acquisition? So the government, in this compulsory acquisition, will use your own declaration against you. So the government, in exercising its right to compulsorily acquire your goods, it will use your own goods declaration against you. So if you declared that your goods are only valued this much, then the government will take your word for it, and the government will acquire your goods for such declared amount. Okay? Sabi mo, X amount lang yung value ng goods mo. Then, sige. The government will acquire your goods for X amount. Sabi mo, X amount lang yung value ng goods na yun. So if you undervalued your declaration, then chances are the government will buy your importation for such a lower amount. So that's how, I hope I made myself clear, that's how the government is able to protect its revenue against undervaluation through the exercise of this right, through the exercise of compulsory acquisition. So let's go to the next slide. Let's continue. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, going back to the steps in compulsory acquisition, the notice of compulsory acquisition is issued. Number 2, the goods are transferred. Number 3, compulsory acquisition proceedings is conducted by the commissioner. And number 4, the commissioner renders a decision and issues a warrant for compulsory acquisition. Then number 5, again, hindi naman basta-basta kinukuha ng gobyerno yung importation mo ng walang kapalit. So this is the 5th step, payment. The government will have to pay for the goods which it will compulsorily acquire. The government has to pay. Okay? The government will have to pay for your goods for how much? Andyan, sa section 709 natin, sa CMTA. Magkano ibabayad sa iyo ng gobyerno kapag na-compulsory acquisition yung importation mo? Magkano ibabayad sa iyo ng gobyerno? Price equal to the declared customs value plus any duties already paid on the goods. Okay? That's the answer. That's how much yan yung ibabayad sa iyo ng gobyerno kung gusto niyang kunin yung importation mo through compulsory acquisition. Again, how much? Declared customs value plus duties already paid. Okay? Kailan babayaran yung importation mo? 10 working days from the issuance of the WCA. 10 working days from the issuance of the WCA. Again, andyan sa screen natin, andyan yung 709 ng CMTA, andyan yung section 5.6 ng CAO. They tell you how much the government will pay for your goods, and also they tell you kailan babayaran sa'yo ng gobyerno yung goods mo. Okay? Next slide, please. Again, going back to payment, let's also answer the question, paano ka babayaran? Or in what form will the government make its payment to you? Let's look at 5.11 of the CAO. Payment to the importer shall be made in cash. Okay? So it should be made in cash. Yan. Okay. Now, next step number 6. Yan, disposition of the goods. Let's look at 5.12 of the CAO. Goods subject of compulsory acquisition shall be disposed through public auction, negotiated sale, or other mode of disposition allowed under the CMTA, subject to appropriate rules and regulations. In other words, yung kinuha ng gobyerno na importation mo, yung goods mo na binayaran ng gobyerno, ibebenta rin naman pala ng gobyerno sa huli. Okay? Does it make sense? Why will the government buy your goods if in the end ibebenta rin pala ng gobyerno? Okay? Recall our discussion earlier. Remember that the government paid you for your declared value. Kung in-undervalue mo yung goods mo, ibig sabihin mababa yung binayad ng gobyerno dyan para sa importation mo. And when the time comes for the disposition of the goods, the government can sell that importation for its actual amount. And there is the possibility na that's when the government can somehow kikita rin yung gobyerno because it paid for a low amount for that importation. Remember, kasi undervalued nga yung goods supposedly. So the government paid for a low amount for those goods, and in the end, after those goods have been acquired, ibibenta ng gobyerno yan for its actual amount. So somehow, kumita rin yung gobyerno, the government revenue has been protected. Okay? Now, let's do a recap. Next slide, please. Ano ulit yung steps? How does the government exercise its right to compulsory acquisition? That's NTC, WPD. If you're into mnemonics, NTC, WPD, National Telecommunications Commission, Western Police District, NTC, WPD. Notice of compulsory acquisition is issued. Transfer of the goods, compulsory acquisition proceedings, the warrant for compulsory acquisition, the payment for the goods, and the disposition of the goods. Okay, so those are the 6 steps involved when the government acquires your importation. Okay, 6 simple steps, easy to understand. Okay, now next slide, please. If you're the importer, is there anything you can do? Sabi natin kanina, compulsory acquisition, sa pilitan, enforced, mandatory, wala kang magagawa, di ka pwedeng tumanggi. Well, strictly speaking, the importer has remedies under the CMTA. The importer can do something if the importer thinks that the compulsory acquisition of its goods was not properly exercised. Okay? Now, anong gagawin ng importer kung gusto niyang i-contest? If the importer wants to assail, if the importer wants to contest the exercise of compulsory acquisition, what will the importer do? The answer is in your CMTA. An importer who is dissatisfied with the decision of the commissioner pertaining to this section may, within 20 working days after the date on which notice of the decision is given, appeal to the Secretary of Finance. Okay? So first step, appeal to the Secretary of Finance. So from the commissioner, go up to the Secretary of Finance. What's the timetable for that? 20 working days. So again, 20 working days to go up to the Secretary of Finance. And thereafter, if the Secretary of Finance still renders an adverse decision, the remedy is still there, go up to the CTA. Okay? As provided for in section 1136 of your CMTA. So again, let's do a recap from the commissioner. If you want to contest the commissioner's decision, go up to the Secretary of Finance, and from the Secretary of Finance, you can still go up to the Court of Tax Appeals or to the CTA. Let's go to section 1136 kasi na-mention siya dyan. 1136 of the CMTA. Next slide, please. Yan. Okay, so there. 1136 makes it clear that a decision of the Secretary of Finance can be elevated to the CTA or Court of Tax Appeals. If you read 1136, unless otherwise provided in this act or by any other law, the party aggrieved by the ruling or decision of the commissioner may appeal to the CTA in the manner and within the period prescribed by law and regulations. Decisions of the Secretary of Finance, when required by this act, may likewise be appealed to the CTA. So that's what 1136 says. From the Secretary of Finance, we can go up to the Court of Tax Appeals. Okay. Next slide, please. Yan. Let's look at Republic Act 9282 because that's the law creating your or expanding the jurisdiction of your CTA or Court of Tax Appeals. You can see in Republic Act 9282, Section 7 there, Section 7A4, you can see there that the decisions of Commissioner of Customs can also be elevated to the CTA, or the CTA has jurisdiction over decisions of the Commissioner of Customs. Okay, so question, just a brief question. If RA 9282 says that Commissioner of Customs, the decision of the Commissioner of Customs decision can be elevated to the CTA, can you skip the Secretary of Finance? Can you skip an appeal to the Secretary of Finance and go straight to the CTA? Can you bypass the Secretary of Finance and go straight to the Court of Tax Appeals? Well, the answer is no, because you have the doctrine of exhaustion of administrative remedies. So, since the CMTA provides for an appeal to the Secretary of Finance, you must first go through the Secretary of Finance and you must exhaust the administrative remedy at the level of the Secretary of Finance before you can go to the CTA, before you can go to the Court of Tax Appeals. So again, we can also apply here the doctrine of exhaustion of administrative remedies. Take note that you have to exhaust first the administrative remedy before the Secretary of Finance before you can go up to the Court of Tax Appeals. Okay? So how do you do it? Next slide, please. How do you do it? How do you elevate the case to the Court of Tax Appeals? You do it through what they call a petition for review. Petition for review ang tawag. So if to be strictly speaking or to be technical about it, how do you call an appeal to the Court of Tax Appeals? It's called under Republic Act 9282. It's called the petition for review. And what is the time period for you to file that petition for review. It's also there in your Republic Act 9282, Section 11, 30 days from the receipt of the decision or ruling of the Secretary of Finance. So 30 days from notice, you have to file your petition for review with the CTA. Okay? So again, let's do a recap. What can the importer do if it wants to contest compulsory acquisition from the commissioner? The importer can go up to the Secretary of Finance. And from the Secretary of Finance, the importer can go up to the Court of Tax Appeals. And after the Court of Tax Appeals, does the importer still have a remedy from wrongful compulsory acquisition? Next slide, please. Yan. Republic Act 9282 tells us may remedy pa. So from the Commissioner to the Secretary of Finance to the CTA, if the CTA still renders an unfavorable decision, the importer can still go up to the Supreme Court. That's according to Section 11 of RA 9282, amending Section 19, review by certiorari. A party adversely affected by the decision or ruling of the CTA and back may file with the Supreme Court a verified petition for review on certiorari. So that's it. From the commissioner, from the commissioner, you go up to the Secretary of Finance, and from the Secretary of Finance, you can go up to the CTA, and from the CTA, you can go up to the Supreme Court through a verified petition for review on certiorari. Okay, next slide, please. Ayan. Timetable for you to go up to the Supreme Court from the CTA, 15 days from notice of the judgment of the CTA's decision. Okay, so that's the timetable for you to go up to the Supreme Court. Now, there's also another point which I'd like to emphasize to you regarding compulsory acquisition. Sige, next slide, please. Your CMTA tells us that nothing in that particular provision of the CMTA limits or affects any other powers of the Bureau with respect to the disposition of the goods or any liability of the importer or any other person with respect to an offense committed in the importation of the goods. In other words, this right to compulsory acquisition is not an exclusive remedy for the government. The government can still file, or the government can still choose to file cases against the importer, the broker, or any other person responsible for violation of the CMTA provision on undervaluation. The government can still proceed against the duties and against the civil liability or criminal liability, if any. Compulsory acquisition does not preclude or does not prevent the government from running after possible criminal liability of the importer or broker or any other person responsible for the undervaluation. So again, if your goods are compulsorily acquired, that's not an excuse, or that does not give you a defense if ever the government also wishes to proceed against you criminally for violation of the CMTA provision on undervaluation. Okay? Now, my final point regarding compulsory acquisition. Sige, please, let's proceed to the next slide. Yes, sir, nagagamit ba yung compulsory acquisition na yan? Well, to be frank with you, I do not hear of many cases, or I do not hear at all of any case wherein the government exercise its right to compulsory acquisition. In fact, I did some research and found this article from 2011 that the government has been experiencing difficulty in exercising this right to compulsory acquisition. Now, ano bang mahirap dito sa compulsory acquisition, remember that in our discussion earlier, the goods will be transferred to customs custody, and the government has to have the storage capacity for that. Kumbaga, ayan, if you look at the article that I reproduced there, dun sa last part, nilagay dyan, it was cited there. He also cited the customs inability to undertake the warehousing and resale of the undervalued items. So kumbaga, yung storage ng goods, yung transfer ng goods, yung effort and yung gastos pagbebenta ng goods. Remember also that the goods that will be acquired, it will also be disposed of by the government. So, ibebenta rin ng gobyerno ng goods and may gastos din for that. So, the government also has to undertake those activities or those steps in order to exercise this right. And medyo matrabaho naman din siya, admittedly. So, probably these are the reasons why the government has not really been, or we do not actually hear much about the government exercising its right to compulsory acquisition. Also, take note, last slide please, sometime in 2011, nagkaroon din ng problema because, in simple terms, wala masyadong panggastos yung gobyerno. Remember that in our discussion, the government will have to pay for your goods. The government will have to give you cash. The government will have to spend also to acquire your goods. So, in other words, saan kukuha ng pera yung gobyerno? The government will also have to have the budget for that. And isa pa yan sa mga concerns siguro ng Bureau of Customs why this right to compulsory acquisition has not been exercised that much. The government also has to have the necessary funds to pay for the goods if it chooses to exercise this right of compulsory acquisition. Okay, so bottom line, hindi rin siya ganun kadali or hindi rin siya ganun kadalas sa tingin ko na-exercise ng gobyerno natin sa ngayon. Okay, so that wraps it up for our discussion this afternoon. I hope you were able to get something out of our discussion, and we hope to see you in our future discussions, mga karpatids. Okay? So I turn you over back to Sir RJ. Salamat.
All right, thank you very much, Attorney Chris. And again, let me just remind ang mga karpatids natin to like this live stream and share nyo kay classmate, share nyo kay crush, share nyo kay friend, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please also like and follow our official Facebook page. That's the CA Resource Project para naman laging updated kayo mga karpatids. With that, again, thank you very much. Stay tuned for future uploads and maraming salamat mga karpatids.
Time. Bye.